Welcome to the inversion and cancellation section of our blending modes. Now, while we had the normal modes, we had the darkening modes, we had the lightening modes, and we had the contrast modes, we're getting into some weird stuff now. You'll notice how you can create beautiful images using these modes, but what's going on can be a little strange. So let's break them down. We'll start with difference and exclusion because they're actually fairly similar. You'll notice that with difference and exclusion on these two images, you'd probably want to go for exclusion to have a smoother sort of image because difference is affecting the colors so drastically, but then again, maybe not. Remember, difference is actually the last of the blending modes that's affected differently by fill opacity as compared to opacity. So if I crank this up, we get an extreme effect as compared to exclusion, which is still somewhat more muted. And in fact, exclusion is affected the same as opacity as it would be with the fill opacity. And the reason for that, as I bump into my microphone, the reason for that yet again is that difference is the last of the blending modes affected differently by fill opacity. So all 8 of those, we finally covered them, were multiply, color burn, linear burn, color dodge, linear dodge add, vivid light, linear light, hard mix, and at last difference. That's all of them. But what are these formulas? Why do they have seemingly similar effects, especially at the lower fills, as compared to the higher ones, which is still, like, difference is much more vibrant, but exclusion is less vibrant. What's happening here? Let's take a quick look at the formulas. Difference is the absolute value of the active layer being subtracted from the background layer. Now, absolute value means that if you get a negative number, it's just going to flip into the positive. And if you've had, I believe it's second semester algebra, you'll know that those become a sort of weird V shape when you're drawing it out. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that if you were to do something like create a black to white gradient over an image like candy and apply difference, the black will be left alone, but the white will do a full color inversion. So we're getting an invert of everything. Look at that. That's quite amazing. Now let's pop back over to our formulas. Exclusion is similar. It's the active layer times the background layer, all multiplied by 2, but that's being subtracted from the active layer plus the background layer. So it will have a similar but muted effect to it. So if we pop back over here to our candy and switch it over to exclusion, you'll see that we get at the gray, just this gray image and not as much of an effect going on. And I've built this side-by-side comparison. On the right, we have exclusion, and on the left, we have difference. Notice how much more vibrant the difference is, especially with all that gray knocked out. Now, there are times that you may want one over the other, but there's something else you should know about the difference mode. Besides being affected differently by fill opacity over standard opacity, which frequently makes it more useful than the exclusion mode, difference can be used for detecting minute changes in things. If we were to just set something to difference, so it's self to difference, and to demonstrate this better, we'll go to our model, which is a duplicate of the layer below her. We'll set her to difference. We get a pure black image. Now, the reason for that is that these are exactly the same. So if you subtract 1 pixel from another pixel, you get 0 because the first pixel is the same as the second pixel. So if you subtract 1 from 1, 0. 255 from 255, 0. It's exactly the same each time. Now, that's very different from exclusion, where you'll get a very different effect altogether. But for difference, check out what you can do here. Let's say that these images were not, in fact, identical. Let me pop this back to normal mode for a moment. Over here, we have a nearly identical image, but let's say that there was a slight scratch on the image. And we wanted to know where that scratch is. And for some reason, my X key was not wanting to affect anything. Let me go ahead and put that in. So let's say we had a slight scratch, and I'm going to make that a little less visible with the patch tool. I'm going to set it to destination. Sorry, I'm going to set it to source, got that backwards, and kind of blend it out a little bit. All right, so we've got some damage going on. There we go. All right, so just a little bit of damage. Now, in our case, I've made it noticeable enough, but check this out. If we take the top layer and set it to difference mode, we can see immediately what's going on. All that's left is the damage between the two images. But it becomes more interesting than that. If we were to have an even more subtle damage, let me just go back in time a little bit. Something more subtle going in here. Like, for example, oops, I'm on the wrong layer. Just a couple of little things. Nothing too pronounced. Now, if we bring this to difference, it doesn't look like there's any difference at all until we add an adjustment layer for levels. Now we can see by cranking this up exactly where the damage is occurring. So you can tell exactly where there's a difference on an image that otherwise would look exactly the same to the human eye. I think that that's absolutely incredible, and I've used this numerous times to see if there's any difference between two images. If there's been too much compression going on, you can see that immediately. So, for example, if you saved out multiple JPEGs, you would hear people say, well, every time you do that, it's a lossy compression, so there's damage happening. But you can't see that damage. Well, if you bring it in and layer it on top of the original non-JPEG image and you toss it in using a difference and cranking up that levels, you'll be able to see static very similar to this pop in very, very quickly. So it's useful for doing image analysis. It's also useful for doing beautiful effects, because wherever you have the lightest color, the white, for example, you'll have a full inversion. Wherever you have a black, you'll have no inversion. So you can get some absolutely fantastic effects going on just with compositing and some really vibrant things. Now, if you do want less, you could use the fill opacity, but you'll notice that the fill opacity will still have very vibrant different colors as compared to exclusion. It's a much more muted style to it. So you can get some subtler effects using exclusion. I know a lot of people will just dismiss exclusion altogether, but honestly, it can be a beautiful effect happening to it. So that is difference and exclusion. Next up, we're going to talk about subtraction and divide. I'll see you next video.